Hello. Our story begins inside of an abandoned home in a gentrified zone in the upper levels of the Coruscant city. He was about 15 clicks away from the Imperial military complex, and he settled in, hunkering down behind some boarded-up windows. He pulled from his belt a hologram and placed it on the floor. His eyes scanned the room before he settled in, leaning his back against the wall and rubbing his eyes. What had he done? His mind ran rampant with assorting thoughts. He was the most by-the-book clone commander in the Grand Army of the Republic, now Empire, and he had just done the most non-by-the-book thing he could ever do. He mutinied against a regime that would treat him far harsher than the Republic would ever do. But these were unprecedented times, and they required unprecedented actions. Cody tapped his index finger on the floor of the room, and he looked over to his helmet, which was leaned up against his backpack. It was filled up with about 2 weeks' worth of supplies, including extra medical rations and food that he could use if he ever ran low. Now, these weren't full meals, they were rehydrated food, and he planned on going off the starvation diet to conserve as much of it as he could for as long as he could. While he wasn't inside the jungles of Kashyyyk or on the lava hills of Mustafar, Coruscant was still a jungle in its own right. He needed to be prepared for whatever came his way, and he knew that his face was the most recognizable one in the galaxy outside of the Emperor's because he was a clone. His fist balled when he thought of Palpatine. Their clone programming had taught them to listen to all of his orders. While Cody would have listened to Palpatine when Order 66 came down, if he actually knew what it was, he would have had the consciousness to consider the options at the very least. Watching Obi-Wan fall the length of the crater haunted him nightly. He knew something wasn't right about Order 66. What it was, he didn't know, but he did know this. Rex had been concerned about it months before it happened. The reports made about the Fives and Tut cases were mostly locked away, but Cody had seen them. He never thought some sort of call to action of such magnitude was possible, but here he was, reaping what he had sown. He didn't question his orders, he obeyed his protocol, and now the galaxy was paying the price. So many what-ifs in his past that could have changed something. But there wasn't time for self-pity or self-blame. There was a game of survival and he was going to live it. Cody's eyes darted from his backpack to the hologram placed right before him. He crossed his legs and took a deep breath. He tapped the toggle on the edge of the device and stared at it. A blue haze ignited and it counted down for him as he spoke into it. Day 1. This is Commander Cody of the 212th Attack Battalion in the 7th Sky Corps. His CC was 2224 and he had betrayed the Empire. Cody went on to speak about his rationale behind the decision. He spoke to whoever was listening about the inhumane actions sanctioned by the Empire. He spoke heavily about his encounter with Crosshair, CT-9904, and what he had done on D6. He was a product of difference, but transformed into a mindless killing machine. Crosshair had always been colder than the rest of his squad, but he was becoming something beyond just himself. He was betraying the clones he had served with. His clone Force 99 was out in the galaxy hiding from the Empire, and Crosshair was aiding Vice Admiral Rampart in their termination. This was further supported as Cody delved into the difference he and his brothers underwent following the execution of Order 66. As a by-the-books person, he admitted that he was careless on Utapau. He should have considered the options, but he couldn't. Something wouldn't allow him to, and he killed his best friend in the process. It was the greatest burden on his heart. It was the one thing in his life that he wished he could have had back. He wished he could tell Obi-Wan that he never meant to hurt him. Well, he did, but he didn't want that to be how their bond ended. He then sat in silence, as he expressed that he was going to make it out of this alive. But in the case he didn't, this was a message to his clone brothers stuck inside the Imperial military. He looked down the barrel of the camera and picked up the device so that it could be level with him. He said that resisting the Empire was their way of life. In due time, the stormtroopers would replace them. This was a fight for survival for a government that would never value them as humans. He promised that before he died, he would ensure Palpatine paid for this. He vowed to use his life as a stepping stone for his brothers, so that they may find their freedom. When it was finished, he returned to his silence, and he packed the device back into the backpack before pulling out a protein stick. He couldn't eat too many of these, but at the current moment, he really needed it. He rolled out a small piece of cloth to lay down on, and he ate the rest of it before passing out. After several hours, he rose to the sound of LAAT gunships buzzing overhead. He grabbed his blaster and prepared to call his men, but he remembered. This was no longer the Clone War. He tapped his head and looked around to double check. The war was over. It was okay. Well, not really, but it would be. The PTSD of the war still sat on his mind. This was the first time since Utapau that he had been awoken by the sounds of LAATs buzzing by like that. Sure, he had heard them at barracks on the front lines, but speeding by like they were trying to kill something brought him back a year. Cody grabbed his lifeless helmet and looked at the disgusting gray marks, before planting it on his head and finding his way out of the building. His main goal was to get out of this rapidly growing part of town into the lower levels where he could be better hidden. He did hope that Crosshair wasn't looking for him, but if he was, that'd make his life a lot more nightmarish. The second day on the run would go much like the first one. He would cover an extensive amount of ground and bunker down for the night in an abandoned location. He did carry credits with him, but he refused to use them. He would only use those credits to pay someone off to stop them from snitching on him. The biggest reason it took him so long to move about was because he couldn't really be seen by anyone. His face and helmet were plastered across billboards, and it was very similar to the hunt for Ahsoka made by Commander Fox. Cody had the duck shock troopers from the Coruscant Guard multiple times. He used the speeder to get out of the base, but he kept the ignition on and sent it away from him as a diversion. That kind of worked, but clearly not to perfection. Just as he had the day before, he opened up the hologram and recorded his thoughts on his second day. Once he was finished, he wasn't really tired, so he took out a book and started to record his thoughts on assassinating Palpatine. He stole the book from a local shop as he was passing by. He had thought about what he said the previous day in his recording, killing Palpatine. Was it possible to kill the most guarded man in the entire galaxy? Surely not, but he was now obsessed with the idea. It definitely wasn't a solo mission, he would need help, but for the time being he would think about different ways to kill the Emperor. And so, one of the most masterful strategists of the Clone War era began concocting his plan for assassinating the Emperor. Obviously, he didn't really get anywhere with his ideas on the first night of working on them, but he found some solace in doing it. He realized after the first night that he was struggling a lot mentally, and he was spending a lot of time inside of his own head. It was really bad for his mental health, and a paranoia started to spring over him as he hid for his breaks where he refreshed with whatever water he could get his hands on. Cody knew that letting his mental health slip would be the end of him. He had seen many mutinied clones fall victim to such internal burdens before they actually left the army. It would not affect him. He refused to allow that to happen. Turns out using his killer instinct as a bred killer helped him ease his mind. Who would have thought? Cody knew that would have fit Baccarat a lot more, but what the hell, it could fit him too. By the end of the week, Cody would descend into the lower levels, where he would set up camp inside of an old warehouse. It was mostly used by drug dealers and gun runners. They left him alone because clones were too deadly for anything to try and kill. Plus, he didn't really have anything of value on him. Even though there were credits in killing and or capturing Cody, most of the drug dealers and gun runners followed a very similar honor code. Snitches get stitches. If any one of them snitched on one another, then they'd be beaten. This was arranged because competition was good for business for all of them, and if their competition got taken down, it meant they'd be next. Regardless, Cody continued writing and recording away. Everything in his life was as normal as he could make it. He spent a lot of time making allies around him. It was all a part of his strategy. Cody found a great deal of relation with the people down here. They saw Cody as one of them, and he felt the same as them. The reason so many people down here felt that Cody was their brother was because they felt forgotten by their government. He was betrayed by the Empire, and so were they. The biggest difference is, he was a war hero and they weren't. The people of the lower levels revered him because he served for all of them to have a better life, and yet he was also betrayed. Cody got a lot of insight into the lives of the everyday person while he was down here on level 1109. He enjoyed the friends he made, and all the while, his plan for Palpatine's death started to unravel inside of his mind. Due to the relative isolation, when the deadbeats of the underworld weren't asking him questions, he was wondering about what happened to some of his brothers. Rex was obviously dead, but what about those who had mutinied? Where did they go? He knew that they hadn't been brought back to the complex, but he also hadn't heard of captured clones or where they had gone. So he was left with no answer regarding his brothers that escaped. Some things not even clone commanders were made aware of. Cody never revealed his plan to these people. as he wanted to keep them as safe as possible. For about 2 weeks, everything went by soundly until a group of Coruscant guardsmen made their way down to his level. While every other clone division was forced to remove their clones, the shock troopers were permitted to hold their red armor until they were replaced. Commander Cody was doing his early morning routine, which was as simple as eating after packing everything up just in case someone came down here, and getting ready. He was always prepared, and it proved him right to be prepared when the shock troopers bursted down the doors to the warehouse. There were other exits, but they were blocked off. Cody slipped down, getting into fistfights with his brothers as the people he had become friends with ran off into the clutches of the clones. Cody bashed a couple heads into a couple crates and walls before using his blaster to stun the clones coming for him. His elite skill in battle outranked every single opponent who came to defeat him. Cody leapt between shelves and fired away, stunning several of his brothers. As he prepared to escape, he could see his friends getting trapped and imprisoned. He knew, especially after learning what their lives were like, that he couldn't let them get captured by these shock troopers, especially because they didn't report him to the Empire. He rushed out the edge of the building, and one of his friends saw it, believing he escaped and left them behind. But Cody would never leave a brother or sister behind. He quickly climbed up on top of the building nearby, as the clones tried to handle everything. The men inside the warehouse were all unconscious, and they needed to maintain their prisoners and their positions, as well as find the rogue clone commander. Cody knelt down on the roof and placed his blaster at the edge of the roof. He fired it at the shock troopers and they dropped to the ground. He may have not been the sharpshooter the Crosshair was, but he was knocking out his opponents easily. Cody yelled out, telling the people to get down, and they dropped, as he leapt to an adjacent building, rolling as he did. All the other shock troopers ran out of the warehouse and fired up into the air, but none of them knowing where Cody was. He looked over and dipped his head, before getting a running start and lunging over the wall and firing down, knocking out 4 of the troopers in the front, before rolling and smashing his blaster into one of their heads, and fistfighting the last trooper. He quickly freed the others and told them to go, but they stopped him, telling him that they wanted to fight. But Cody shook his head. He pointed at the weapons and told them to go make themselves some credits and stay hidden. He would draw the Coruscant guardsmen lower into the city. He saluted to them, telling them that it had been an honor being with them and serving with them. They all smiled as he rushed into an alleyway, firing at a clone gunship as he did, getting their attention. Cody would spend the next 3 or 4 days on the run actively. He wasn't super sure of how long he was gone, because he spent most of that time awake. Luckily for him, the locals in the underworld were super kind to him, so he was able to get supplies that he wouldn't have otherwise. When he found his home on level 1342, he bunkered down in an abandoned convenience store. All the goodies were taken out of it by this point, but he could still use the back rooms as a bedroom for privacy and such. The biggest reason for this choice was the fresh water source nearby. By this point, Cody had a pretty mapped out plan for how he would kill Palpatine, and he was preparing for the fact that he could be Force sensitive. There were some reports that had gotten into his hands after the war ended that identified a case to be closed. There were rumors growing that Palpatine had fought the Jedi with his own lightsaber, and that the Jedi insurgents weren't killed by the Emperor's rescuers, rather the fact that he was the one that fought them off and killed them himself. Cody shut these rumors down instantly, but they had sat in the back of his mind until a couple days before the shock troopers showed up. The convenience store would continue to be his base of operations as he tried to figure out where he might find more clones like himself. But there was a sickening realization. He probably wouldn't. The clones were a dying breed, and the Empire didn't want them procreating with citizens, let alone integrating into society. They were to be cast aside like nobodies and nothings. Years of service to die in the streets like common animals. This depressed Cody deeply, and while the people he became friends with were nothing more than street thugs, they actually felt like a small family. His brothers had all changed after Order 66. There was no more camaraderie. It was just do as they were told. He couldn't enjoy eating with anyone, as everyone's personalities became as dull and as gray as their colorless armor. He wished for a new set of friends that he could call family, but this area of town was not like the one he had just come from. He wasn't exactly the most welcome face around here. Clones weren't seen as heroes this far down. They were viewed in the same light as the Jedi, simple enforcers doing the bidding of the local government, one that was just as corrupt as a surface-side government and the Republic or Empire or whatever they called themselves now. Cody and the clones were simple pieces of oppression, and Cody being on the run made him a target that could be killed, but he wasn't on their radar because they didn't follow Republic or Empire news. He didn't go out much when he was down here, and he spent a lot of time in the back of the convenience store, writing out his assassination plans. On top of that, his daily recordings were going well, but he was struggling. The isolation he faced in the lower levels, alongside the lack of natural light and no human interaction, killed him. His eating habits changed, and he felt really tiresome all the time. Cody felt truly at rock bottom, and despite his mind clinging on to the hope of killing off the Emperor, it just felt impossible. He couldn't do it alone, and that word couldn't kept revolving around in his mind like a weapon. Cody felt this way towards almost everything. First, it was he couldn't work on his plans. Then it was the fact that he couldn't record his messages. Then it slowly transformed into being unable to get water. The crushing weight of his inner turmoil kept him sealed to the bottom of the room, inside of a random convenience store who knows how many levels down from the surface. His few weeks or whatever down here led to him deciding that he needed to be the change he wanted to see. If he didn't at least get up, or try, or do anything, then he wouldn't free his brothers or the galaxy from this oppression. He knew truths. He knew that the Confederacy was destroyed. He knew that there were rumors within the Senate about Palpatine being fearful of losing control. He understood what he was capable of changing if he killed Palpatine. He rose to the challenge that sat ahead of him, and he decided that from now on, he would cultivate the minds of the galaxy to build a government for the people of the galaxy. Cody left his little store and started his ascent. He wouldn't go straight for the Senate district, but he would go as high as possible and prepare to do whatever it took to get himself out of the suffering. His ascent in physical location coincided with his emotional rise. He started to feel like himself, and while it took some time to find CC-224 again, he was overjoyed that he could be himself. Cody broke out of his depressive state and found home on level 1051. It was as close to the surface as he had been in a long time, and he was just happy to be closer to the light. Just seeing it from the underworld portal gave him hope. There was a small part of him that wanted to enlist these citizens in the fight, but this was a job of a soldier. Maybe they would appreciate the clones after all of this, but right now, this was their fight. Cody found himself a place to hide in the back of a kitchen inside of a local cantina. He made a deal with the owner of the restaurant. There was an apartment attached to the back of the restaurant that the owner didn't use because she had her own living space. She told Cody that he could have it in exchange for work in her kitchen, which was simply being the dishwasher. It doesn't sound important, but she ran one of the best dining restaurants on this side of the underworld. Having an individual work the dishwashers for her while she found some paid labor was a deal she was content with making. Cody didn't mind it, especially because he needed the physical exercise. The high energy of the kitchen was something that helped his blood get pumping. It also took a couple hours to get down, but when he got it down, he went to work, slamming dirty dishes into the machine, pulling out super hot silverware, plates and pans, and putting them away. He was quick with it, and he enjoyed it for what it was worth. He did continue to keep up on his journal and establishing his connection to the owner of the restaurant, who used the nickname May as her name. She didn't tell anyone her real name, but she had contacts that might be able to help Cody with his little issue. The two of them formed a rapid bond in the first week of Cody's stay, and because she was the manager and owner, she stayed behind until everyone left after lights went out. One of those nights, she and Cody spoke about his desires. While he didn't specifically say killing a political figure, he did tell her that he was highly interested in getting some other clones into his ranks. She saw this as perfectly normal. Clones like to be together, and she did inform him that he wasn't the only clone that came down through the lower levels. She would keep an ear out for him, and if there was anything of interest, he'd be the first to hear. Cody used his time inside of May's restaurant to get himself back into shape, to get his mind churning the way it should have been, and preparing for his assault. Luckily for him, May was able to bring in a couple of rogue clones who had hidden themselves away, thanks to Rex saving them. Most clones opted to abandon Coruscant. These 5 didn't. Their names were Viz, Range, Jez, Red, and Simeon. None of them were from the same unit, but they all ended up on Coruscant when they planned on leaving the Corps. They were all very close and they had grown their small family due to contacts in the lower levels, like May. When Cody found them, he was so relieved and he expressed eternal gratitude to May. She was just happy to help. Cody and the other 5 caught up after Cody finished his shift, and they spent the entire night learning of each other's stories. Everyone present knew of the legendary Commander Cody, but he was much more interested in their own experiences, all of which were vastly different to the others. As Cody listened, he understood that they all hated Palpatine as much as he did, and he slowly informed them of his plan. Each and every single one of them stood up once he was finished explaining the details and saluted, telling Commander Cody that they would lay down their lives to serve with him in his restoration of the free galaxy. Cody smiled and stood up, saluting them each and promising that no matter what, their actions would go down as ones meant to incite change in a defeated galaxy. Palpatine's rule needed to come to an end. The clones agreed and prepared. Days before they returned to the surface, more details would be shared with each other, as they used an old broken down commoner's area for their training exercises. Simple stuff they could do to make sure they understood how to work best as a team. May even let them bunk in her restaurant after she hired an actual dishwasher, because she hated Palpatine just as much as they did. The clones were ready and they moved out. While only Simeon believed that Palpatine was Force sensitive before Cody suggested it, the rest of the squad was prepared for the most extreme circumstances Cody prepared them for. There were guards that Cody was informed about thanks to the clones who served with Rex. Also, in the days leading up to their actual mission, Cody would learn that Rex had gone out to the Outer Rim or something like that. So, if they survived, Cody knew where he was going, because it was a huge deal that Rex had actually survived. Regardless, the clones began their ascent. They stayed away from populated districts on the top side of the city, and used abandoned or lightly used areas of town to make their way closer to the senatorial district. The difficult thing with the Senate district was how packed it was. They would have to use a series of underground tunnels to get through. Luckily, Red was once a Coruscant guardsman, so he happened to know how to get into the executive building through the passageways under the city. After days of trekking from the underworld to the senatorial district, they waited until sunrise. Inside of the building itself, Jez kept his eyes peeled for incoming vessels, and when he saw the Emperor's escort slide across the sky from the royal palace, they made their move. Cody ran to the entrance of the Emperor's office, as Viz, Red, and Simeon prepared by the pillars outside of it. Range clung onto the ceiling and hid in the shadows, as Jez made his way to their location. Sidious landed and walked out of his shuttle, flanked by his royal guards and greeted by shock troopers of the Coruscant Guard. He walked past them as his guards followed along. He was preparing for another long day of tearing the galaxy apart and turning it in on itself. Sidious walked up to the entrance of the room and he felt the disturbance. As he did, Cody ran around the corridor yelling "traitor" and bashed the back of his weapon into Sidious's nose, before being launched across the room by the Force and into a desk at the end of it. Palpatine felt a rise of pain as he moved his hands to his face. His guard rushed in as Cody started to open fire on them, stopping them in their tracks and forcing them to push Palpatine into cover, but he laughed as they did. He told them to stay back. He would handle this. Sidious wasn't about taking unnecessary risks, but this was Commander Cody, the first clone commander he contacted after Order 66. He rolled around asking if he finally felt something after killing Master Kenobi. Cody's hand clenched the blaster harder as he looked down and then back up, explaining that he regretted that decision every day of his life. He fired his blaster several times, as Sidious used the Force to float every shot back at Cody, who evaded quickly. The Sith Lord walked through the entrance, and his body was shocked when several electrical circuits transformed and shot outwards, crippling him from the knees down. The guards rushed over, and before they could get Sidious off the ground, they were pelted from behind by Viz, Red, and Simeon. Range slipped back, using his long-range rifle to fire down on the approaching Coruscant guardsmen, who dropped nearly instantly. Jez rushed out of a corridor and took cover, assisting Range with his cover fire. The other clones were struggling with taking down the royal guards due to their armor, and all the while Palpatine was just laughing as he crawled out of the electrical trap. As he got to his feet, an explosion launched him backwards as Cody threw a thermal imploder at the royal guards, killing them all. Sidious smacked into the wall and his laughing stopped. This was getting annoying now. He rose to his feet seamlessly and raised his hands, telling Cody that it was over for him. The other clones rushed in as Sidious flung Viz, Red, and Simeon across the room and into the chairs at his desk. He shot electricity at Cody, but before it could hit him, Range was incinerated as Jez got caught in the crossfire, both of them stepping in front of Cody. Jez fell backwards as he cried out in agony. Cody yelled out as he pressed the ignition switch on an explosion that ripped the room apart, dropping everyone inside and outside of it. A number of Coruscant guardsmen were killed in the blast. Cody felt his face and he could feel flesh of his skin, despite having been wearing a helmet. When his eyes opened, half of the mask had been ripped off and he looked out in front of him. A shadow started to walk towards him. He panicked, grabbing his blaster and aiming for the individual. When the shadow broke into a visible face, he felt terror shoot down his body. Palpatine's body was shredded in half. His face was half off, and he looked at him with rage. A red lightsaber ignited, and he prepared to make Cody's death impossibly painful. As he raised his weapon, Jez rushed forward, tackling the Sith Lord and driving a knife into Palpatine's abdomen 3 times before he was cut in half with a single strike. Cody cried out for Jez, but Red, Viz, and Simeon were going to finish this for all of their brothers, as they fired down into Palpatine, who was unable to move fast enough to get out of the way. But celebration could not commence. Red was clipped in the abdomen as shock troopers rushed into the room. He fell over and lobbed a thermal imploder into their ranks, killing several troopers. Viz and Simeon helped him up, as Cody took point and they started their escape, running through fire and smoke. Cody turned back once more to make sure Sidious was dead, and there wasn't any movement. The clones would make their escape after a harrowing mission, but Cody wasn't finished yet. The boys would have their memorial for their fallen brothers. It would be a sad day, because no one would ever know their names. Jez, Range, and Red, who had died to his injuries, would always be remembered for their sacrifices to save the galaxy. However, Cody was on a mission to find Rex now. He told the others that they could join him if they wanted, but they opted to stay here. Simeon and Viz would try and inspire others to join them on their journey away from the Imperial control. For now, Cody would again be on his own. There would be a lot of intergalactic issues that stemmed from Palpatine's death, but it by no means stopped the galaxy from functioning. The Imperial Senate had a lot of work to do because of it, but they were able to get past it with very little problem. Mas Amedda took Palpatine's role for a couple of weeks, before deciding that he didn't really want to be Emperor. He was kind of a yes man. It's why he was able to remain in politics for so long at the top. He went with the flow, and he did the same here, helping the Empire become a democracy in some form. It wasn't at all like the Republic, but there was an executive branch made of 13 members that was created, and it would be the seed of a new government that would function better than Palpatine's empire. Much of Sidious's fears were true, and he would have stomped them out in due time, but in his absence they were able to manifest. This wasn't actually terrible for the galaxy. It just meant that more widespread representation would come out under the banner of the Empire. A lot of secret budgets were exposed, and people quickly learned that Palpatine wasn't really their savior, more like an enslaver. The clones were the first army to find their freedom in all of this. They were released from their shackles, especially after Tantus was exposed. People didn't like the clones that much, but they were also disgusted by the treatment the clones had received. Many people cared enough to say they cared, but that didn't mean that they'd go out of their way to actually do anything about it. Though people with an actual voice inside the Senate, who did actually care, were able to do something about it with this new system. One that assisted the clones in thanks for what they had done for the galaxy during what slowly appeared to be a fake war. Cody, inversely, after months of change in the heart of the galaxy, would find himself worn out. He wasn't able to find Rex, and he decided to lay low for a while. He would live out his life bouncing around, making new contacts with surviving brothers, and spending time trying to find those he was closest with. But the most surprising one would be a person he found inside of a cantina on Tatooine. He would see a bearded man that resembled Obi-Wan. Cody would strike up a conversation with this Ben individual, and talk to him about how much regret he had over everything that happened. He blamed himself for everything and he wished he were a better trooper. Ben just simply listened, acting as if much of this information here was new. Of course, Cody thought Ben and Obi-Wan looked similar, but he couldn't be Obi-Wan because Obi-Wan died on Utapau. Cody would eventually find Rex, but right here and right now, pasts were forgiven and friendships were solidified. Ben revealed himself, and 2 brothers that bonded over the conflict of war were brought together once again. Years following the change of the Galactic Empire, those who served the Emperor found themselves in varying locations. Vader crowned himself as Master of the Knights of Ren. They had started a conflict with him and he decided to become their ruler. It wouldn't really do much to change the lives of the Empire, but he found some belonging and purpose as their ruler, so it's where he stayed. The Inquisitorius were either hunted down by the clones, or they found different locations to hide away and either become Jedi once more, or forget either path. The Empire became the Democratic Empire, despite its double negative titling. It would be a system for the people, and the galaxy would come to prosper because of it. Obi-Wan and Cody would remain good friends for the rest of their lives, Cody even setting up Obi-Wan with May, which would turn out eventually. Cody would also be a part of Luke and Leia's lives as their uncle. Kenobi would also try and find Vader at some point, but the Knights of Ren never made themselves very public. Their greatest accomplishment under Vader's rule would be killing Darth Maul. Cody and his brothers, on the other hand, would have the benefit of living out full lives. Rex and Cody would reunite, and their brotherhood would extend out to Wolf, Gregor, and hundreds of other survivors. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to all the patrons: Benjamin Wells, Ozpin, Angel Dust, Officiate, Seju Jagger, Groot36, Hunter Belden, Rosebird, Jack Silver, Lindo Asher, Alexander Reese, The Beginning and End, Jango Fett Clone, Nick5098, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavic Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Lally Ant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, Last Jedi, Apollo, Wiwu670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Knox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tam, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunling Slayer 66, Batman Studios, Anakin003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Airbus, Rex the Wolf, The Many Three First Names, Darksaint46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. If I sound a little weird today, I managed to get sick twice in 3 weeks, so woo, let's go. I'm really cool. I'm at the end of it, so hopefully it won't sound like this in the next video. Otherwise, I'm going to tell you about this story. So with this one, I really wanted to cover Cody as an individual. I really wanted to have some effect of PTSD present, also a little bit of depression. Didn't focus a whole lot on it, but I just wanted those elements to be present within him. His character, I feel like, had a lot of potential to be shown off in Bad Batch. I don't know if we're going to get a clone show or not, but what we could have seen with Cody is probably here, just without actually killing Palpatine. I thought it was cool kind of having Cody and the people of the underworld kind of feel like they related to each other. I thought that was an interesting element that wouldn't really be seen from the title of this video, like just kind of came out of left field. And that's kind of one of my favorite dynamics, is Cody just building relationships with people in the underworld that are like, oh, we're kind of similar. We got betrayed by the Empire. We kind of get each other. And I feel like that connection and community was what really led Cody to coming back around and going up and actually doing the thing. Hope you all enjoyed. I love you all. Spread the love. And always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.